Hello, and welcome to Lyla's Lullabies, where we spend time exploring with Lyla, a traveler who wanders the world at her own pace, while sharing her most enriching and restorative moments with you. In tonight's story, we'll follow Lyla as she explores the charming city of Charleston, South Carolina. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself go. We're so glad you're here. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. The early morning flight from Atlanta had been smooth and uneventful, and Lyla stepped out of Charleston International Airport into an April morning that felt like the season had arrived with intention. The air was warm but not yet heavy, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and something green and growing, and the light had that particular southern quality, soft and golden, as though the sun were being generous with its attention. Sadie was waiting near the arrivals, leaning against a white sedan with oversized sunglasses pushed up on her head. She was smaller than Lyla remembered from their one previous meeting. They'd been introduced by a mutual friend at a dinner party in New York the previous autumn, when Sadie was in the city for work. They had hit it off immediately, and after talking for hours had exchanged numbers, agreeing to meet up the next time Lyla's travels allowed. Lyla had texted her when she was coming to Atlanta and had a couple of days to spare. "Lyla, welcome to Charleston. How was the flight?" Sadie asked. Her smile was warm, wide, and genuine, the kind that made you feel immediately at ease. "Early but easy. I'm so glad to be here. And thank you for picking me up. You really didn't have to." "Oh, please. It's no trouble at all. Besides, I wanted to get an early start. There's so much to show you. And April is honestly the most beautiful time to be here. You picked well." They loaded Lyla's bag into the trunk and pulled out of the airport, Sadie navigating the highway with relaxed confidence. She'd grown up in Charleston, left for college and graduate school, but had come back a few years ago. Something about the city had pulled her back. The history, the beauty, the particular rhythm of life that felt different from the pace of northern cities. "It's not that nothing happens here," Sadie said with a laugh. "It's that everything happens at a pace that lets you actually enjoy it. Does that make sense?" "It does. I can already feel it." They parked in a lot on the edge of the historic district and walked toward the center, the streets narrowing and becoming more beautiful with every block. The houses were stunning. Antebellum mansions and smaller Georgian and Victorian homes, their facades painted in soft colors, their gardens spilling bougainvillea and wisteria over wrought iron gates. "I thought we'd start with breakfast," Sadie said, leading them down a quiet street. "There's a place I love that does traditional Southern food. Real Charleston breakfast, not the tourist version." The restaurant was on a residential street, its entrance almost easy to miss. Just a simple sign and a door that led into a cozy dining room with white tablecloths and morning light streaming through tall windows. It felt more like someone's home than a restaurant, and the other diners were mostly locals, lingering over their meals with the unhurried pace that seemed characteristic of the city. They ordered shrimp and grits, a Charleston classic, Sadie insisted, along with biscuits with gravy, eggs, and fresh fruit. The shrimp and grits arrived in a ceramic bowl, the grits creamy and rich, the shrimp plump and perfectly cooked, nestled in a sauce that was savory and slightly smoky with a hint of heat. "Oh my goodness," Lyla said after the first bite. "This is extraordinary." "Right? Charleston breakfast is serious business. The grits alone are worth the trip." They ate slowly, savoring each bite, talking about the city and what the day held. Sadie had grown up eating this food, she said, but it still felt like a treat to sit down to it properly. After breakfast, they walked toward Rainbow Row, one of Charleston's most photographed streets. The 13 Georgian row houses painted in a sequence of pastel colors, pink, yellow, blue, green, were instantly recognizable, their facades cheerful and distinctive in the morning light. "It's a bit touristy, I know," Sadie said, watching other visitors take photos, "but I never get tired of looking at it. There's something about the colors that just makes you happy." They lingered for a moment, admiring the houses before walking south toward the Battery. The streets here were among the oldest in Charleston, and Sadie pointed out details as they walked. The way certain houses showed evidence of earthquake damage that had been repaired in the 1880s. The old carriage houses now converted into separate residences. The subtle differences in architecture that marked different eras of the city's history. The Battery was a promenade along the waterfront, lined with antebellum mansions on one side and the waters of Ashley Harbor on the other. The mansions were extraordinary, grand and dignified, their columns and porches speaking of wealth and ambition, their gardens immaculately maintained. On the waterfront side, the morning breeze off the water was cool and refreshing, carrying the salt smell of the harbor. They walked along the promenade, stopping occasionally to look at the harbor views. Fort Sumter visible in the distance, sailboats moving through the water, the occasional dolphin breaking the surface and drawing gasps from passers-by. White Point Garden was adjacent to the Battery, a small but beautifully maintained park with ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss. The moss hung from the branches in long gray curtains, moving gently in the breeze, and the effect was otherworldly, mysterious and romantic and deeply atmospheric. "The live oaks have been here for hundreds of years," Sadie explained, walking beneath them. "Some of them predate the city itself. They're one of the things I love most about Charleston, this sense of deep time, of things that have been here long before us and will be here long after." They sat on a bench beneath one of the largest oaks, looking up at the canopy of branches and moss overhead. The light filtered through the leaves, dappled and golden, and the Spanish moss swayed gently, almost hypnotically. A few other visitors were in the garden, but it felt peaceful and unhurried, the kind of place that invited you to slow down. From White Point Garden, they walked north along the waterfront, following the path through Waterfront Park. The park was lovely in the April morning. The grass impossibly green, flower beds in full bloom, families and couples enjoying the pleasant weather. A large fountain anchored one section, children playing in its spray, and further along, benches and swings offered views of the harbor. Late morning, Sadie led them inland toward the Nathaniel Russell House, one of Charleston's finest examples of neoclassical architecture. The house dated from 1808, she explained, and had been carefully restored by the historic Charleston Foundation. "It's worth going inside for one thing alone," Sadie said as they approached the elegant facade. "The staircase. It's one of the most beautiful staircases in America." Inside, the house was furnished to reflect its original period, each room decorated with period-appropriate furniture and art. The rooms were elegant and well-proportioned, the high ceilings and tall windows letting in generous light. But Sadie was right. When they reached the staircase, Lyla stopped and simply stared. The staircase was a masterpiece of design and craftsmanship, a free-flying spiral that rose through the house without visible support, curving upward with impossible grace. The handrail followed the curve in a continuous sweep of polished wood, and the whole structure seemed to defy gravity, floating in the air as though held in place by nothing more than elegance. "How is this even possible?" Lyla asked, studying the construction. "It looks like it should fall down." "The engineering is remarkable," Sadie agreed. They used a combination of techniques, hidden supports, cantilevering, but from the outside, it looks effortless. I think that's what makes it so beautiful. It hides its own complexity. They spent a while studying the staircase from different angles, admiring how the curve changed as you moved around it, how the light played on the wood, how the whole thing seemed to be a single fluid movement frozen in space. After leaving the house, they found a spot for a light lunch at a cafe tucked away on a quiet street. Salads and a cup of she-crab soup, the latter a Charleston specialty that was rich and creamy with a hint of sherry, the crab meat tender and sweet. They ate outside at a small table, watching the street life, couples walking hand in hand, children being led along by parents, the occasional horse-drawn carriage passing with tourists aboard. "Okay, now I really have a surprise for you," Sadie said with her wide smile as they finished. "I've been enjoying everything so far. What's next?" "South of Broad, I want to take you to a secret garden." They walked south past Broad Street, into a neighborhood of even grander houses, the streets quieter and more residential. Sadie seemed to know exactly where she was going, leading them down a series of streets before stopping in front of a modest-looking brick house set back from the road, its gate partially obscured by climbing jasmine. "This is Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield's house," Sadie said, opening the gate. "She's an old friend of the family. She's in her 80s now, but she's still incredibly sharp, and her garden is, well, you'll see." Sadie knocked on the door, and after a moment it opened to reveal a small, elegant woman with white hair neatly arranged, wearing a simple but well-cut dress and a warm smile. Her eyes were bright and curious, and she clasped Sadie's hands in hers with genuine pleasure. "Sadie, darling, how lovely! And this must be your friend Lyla. Come in, come in." "Mrs. Whitfield, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for having us." Eleanor Whitfield led them through the house, cool and comfortable, furnished with the kind of understated elegance that came from generations of good taste rather than recent acquisition, and opened a door at the back that led into the garden. Lila's breath caught. The garden was extraordinary, not in the formal, manicured way of the grand plantation gardens they'd seen earlier, but in a wilder, more personal way. It was a true secret, enclosed by high brick walls and overflowing with plants, a dense tapestry of color and texture and life. Native plants dominated, a fact Mrs. Whitfield was clearly proud of. Flowering dogwood spread its elegant branches overhead, the white blossoms tinged with pink at their tips. Below, beds of native wildflowers created drifts of color: purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, butterfly weed in brilliant orange. Climbing hydrangeas covered one wall, their lace-capped flowers just beginning to open. "Everything you see here is native to this region," Mrs. Whitfield explained, guiding them along a stone path that wound through the garden. "I started the transition about 20 years ago, when I realized that the traditional Charleston garden, usually imported boxwood hedges and English roses, was not good for our local ecosystem. The native plants support the birds and butterflies and insects in ways the imported plants simply can't. As if to prove her point, a monarch butterfly landed on a cluster of milkweed nearby, its wings opening and closing slowly in the April sunshine. A hummingbird appeared moments later, hovering near a red trumpet vine before darting away. "Oh, look at that," Lyla said softly, watching the butterfly. "They come every spring now," Mrs. Whitfield said with evident satisfaction. 20 years ago, I barely saw monarchs in this garden. Now they're everywhere." They walked deeper into the garden, which revealed new sections around every turn. A shady corner planted with ferns and hostas, a sunny border overflowing with native grasses and wildflowers, a small pond where dragonflies hovered over the water. Climbing roses, though Mrs. Whitfield noted these were a native species, scrambled over an old wooden arbor, their scent sweet in the warm air. Sadie and Mrs. Whitfield clearly knew each other well, and their conversation flowed easily as they walked. Lyla listened, absorbing both the garden and the history. Mrs. Whitfield had a way of weaving the story of the plants together with the story of Charleston itself. How the city's gardens had changed over the centuries. How different waves of immigration had brought different plants and gardening traditions. How the current movement toward native landscaping was quietly transforming neighborhoods throughout the city. "Charleston has always been a garden city," Mrs. Whitfield said, pausing beside a magnificent stand of native azaleas, their pink blossoms reflecting in the small pond. "Even during the darkest periods of our history, people kept their gardens. It's something in the character of this place, a need to make beautiful things grow." Eventually they made their way back to the house, where Mrs. Whitfield had set out tea on a small table in the shade of a magnolia tree. The tea was served in china cups with small sandwiches and cookies, and they sat together for a while, sipping and talking. Mrs. Whitfield told them about Charleston in the years she remembered, how the city had changed and yet stayed the same in certain fundamental ways. She talked about the civil rights movement and how it had affected the city, about the hurricanes that had tested Charleston's resilience, about the slow work of preservation that had saved so many historic buildings from demolition. "This city has survived everything," she said, pouring more tea with a steady hand. "Revolution, the Civil War, hurricanes, you name it. And every time, people have come back and rebuilt, and they've made it beautiful again. That's what Charleston does. It endures, and it blooms." They thanked Mrs. Whitfield warmly when it was time to leave, and she insisted on giving Lyla a small cutting from one of her native plants, a piece of butterfly weed, wrapped carefully in a damp cloth. "Plant it in a sunny spot," she said. "It'll bring you monarchs." Back on the street, they walked to where Sadie had parked, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cobblestones. They drove across the Ashley River toward James Island, the route taking them through neighborhoods that transitioned from urban to suburban before the bridge appeared. Pitt Street Bridge was an old bridge, no longer used by cars, that had been converted into a pedestrian walkway. They parked nearby and walked out onto the bridge as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The bridge offered views in all directions, the Ashley River stretching north, the creek and marshes spreading south, and to the west, an unobstructed view of the sky where the sun was beginning to change color. The marshes were beautiful in the late afternoon light, the salt grass golden and swaying in the breeze, the water reflecting the sky in patches of blue and gold. A great blue heron stood motionless in the shallows, watching for fish, its patience seemingly infinite. They leaned against the bridge railing and watched as the sky began to shift. The sun sank lower, the clouds catching fire, and the marsh water became a mirror for the colors overhead. Other people had gathered on the bridge, couples, families, photographers with tripods, all drawn to this particular spot for sunset. "This is one of my favorite places in Charleston," Sadie said quietly, watching the colors deepen. "It's not as dramatic as some sunsets, but there's something about the marsh and the bridge and the way everything just glows. It feels peaceful in a way that's hard to describe." The sun touched the horizon and began to sink, the sky blazing in shades of orange and pink and deep rose. The marsh grass seemed to catch fire, each blade lit from within, and the water below reflected everything, doubling the beauty. A pelican flew overhead, its silhouette dark against the burning sky, and somewhere in the marsh a nightbird began to call. When the last light had faded, they drove back across the river into Charleston proper, the city's lights beginning to glow as evening settled in. Sadie had mentioned a rooftop bar she loved, a place with good jazz and views over the city, and they made their way there as darkness deepened. The bar was on the top floor of a boutique hotel in the historic district, accessible by a small elevator that opened directly onto the rooftop. The space was lovely, low furniture, string lights, a bar along one wall, and views stretching out over Charleston's rooftops in every direction. A small jazz quartet was playing in one corner, piano, bass, trumpet, and drums, their sound warm and unhurried, perfectly suited to the evening. The music drifted across the rooftop, blending with the sounds of the city below and the cool night air. They were playing standards, mostly familiar melodies rendered with subtle variations, each musician listening to the others, the conversation between instruments as natural and easy as the best human conversations. Sadie and Lyla found a table near the edge of the rooftop with a view of the city and ordered drinks, bourbon for Sadie, a gin and tonic for Lyla, and settled in to listen. The music was genuinely good, played with care and feeling, and Lyla found herself absorbed in it, noticing the way the trumpet player bent certain notes just slightly, how the pianist left space between phrases, letting the silence be part of the music. During a break between sets, the musicians came to the bar for water, and Sadie, who seemed to know everyone in Charleston, introduced Lyla to the trumpet player, a tall man named James with kind eyes and an easy manner. "How long have you been playing?" Lyla asked. "Oh, since I was about 12. My grandfather played cornet, old jazz, New Orleans style. He taught me everything I know, which turns out to be quite a lot," James said with a self-deprecating smile. "Charleston has a good jazz scene, actually. Not as famous as New Orleans, but there are some serious musicians here. We play most Friday nights." "It sounds wonderful. The way you all listen to each other. It's like a conversation." James smiled at that. "That's exactly what it is. Jazz is fundamentally about listening. The music only works when everyone in the band is paying attention to everyone else. It's one of the reasons I love it. It teaches you something about how to be in the world." They chatted for a few more minutes before James returned to the small stage for the next set. The quartet began again, this time with something slower and more contemplative, a ballad that filled the rooftop with a particular kind of beauty, the kind that made you want to close your eyes and simply let it wash over you. Sadie and Lyla listened, sipping their drinks, the music and the evening and the warmth of good company creating something that felt close to perfect. Other guests were similarly absorbed. A couple dancing slowly near the stage, a group of friends talking quietly, a man alone at the bar with his eyes closed, completely lost in the music. Eventually, Sadie excused herself to find the ladies' room, and Lyla moved her chair slightly closer to the edge of the rooftop, looking out over Charleston. The city spread below her in a tapestry of lights and shadows, the steeples of churches rising above the rooftops, the old houses glowing with warm light from their windows, the streets visible as ribbons of amber between the buildings. Beyond the city, the dark shapes of the rivers and harbors marked the edges of the land, and beyond that, invisible but ever present, the Atlantic Ocean. The jazz drifted behind her, the trumpet tracing a melody that seemed to follow the contours of the city below, rising with the steeples, settling into the quiet streets, breathing with the rhythm of the place. Charleston at night was beautiful in a way that felt earned, the result of centuries of care and survival and rebuilding, each generation adding something to the story. She thought about the day, the morning light on Rainbow Row, the Spanish moss swaying beneath ancient oaks, the impossible grace of the Nathaniel Russell staircase, Mrs. Whitfield's secret garden bursting with native wildflowers, the marsh glowing gold at sunset. She thought about Sadie, who had returned to this city and found in it something worth staying for, something that rewarded those who took the time to look closely. The music continued, the quartet finding its way through another standard, and Lyla let it carry her, the notes drifting across the rooftop like the breeze off the harbor, gentle and unhurried, asking nothing of her except to listen, to be present, to let the evening hold her in its warm and quiet hands. Charleston breathed below her, ancient and alive, and the music played on, and the night stretched out before her like an invitation. She said yes,